This is it. You've made it all the way to the end. All you need to do to graduate from college is finish your final report. I think you can do it. Let's talk about being a better writer. The thing that makes you a better writer is reading. So in general, you want to read to stay abreast of what's going on in your field, but just in general, you want to read a wide variety of both literature and nonfiction. In order to complete any research project, you want to do a comprehensive literature review or search on that topic. If you can't find things right on point, look for parallel or similar cases, current or historic. For example, when I was looking at adult participatory recreational co-ed sport, there wasn't a whole lot out there. But there was quite a bit about what happens when workplaces become co-ed. That's a parallel case. You also want to develop a scholarly identity. What theories do you subscribe to? What do you believe? For the big debates in your field, where do you fall? But you also want to remain open to growth and development as a scholar. Just because you believe something today doesn't mean that you can't be convinced by good evidence later that something else may actually be a more accurate representation of the social world. Take a moment to consider how you read. Do you just sit down and read, or do you have a strategy? You should have a strategy for what you're trying to accomplish. You should read differently in different situations. Reading a novel, take your time. Go back, reread passages, think about it. Reading academic theory, same thing. But are you trying to gather pieces of information? Maybe you only need to skim the article to get to a key piece of information that you're looking for. Can you follow the lines of reasoning or the arguments put forward? When I read, if somebody says somewhere in the passage, there are 3 ways that XYZ happens, the first thing I do is say, okay, what are the 3 things? I identify those 3 things, and then I read all of the passages about them. Don't give up. Academic reading is hard. But in order to get better at writing, I highly recommend reading. Academic writing is also a process. I do a lot of writing that I don't end up using. For example, when I start a new project, I'll just brainstorm ideas. Throughout the course of that project, I'll continue to do this. I may use some of what I write, I may not. But it allows me to really organize my thoughts. You should be able to diagram or outline your paper. What is the key argument you're making? How are you making that argument? With what evidence are you making that argument? What can you conclude based on what you found? In your initial draft, you probably should have a lot of digressions. At least I do. I end up having to cut them out. When I want to write a 25-page journal article, I usually end up writing a 35 to 40-page paper, and then I have to cut it down. And finally, try to find a way to enjoy writing. Set the stage. Make yourself comfortable. And last but not least, you spend much more time editing than you spend writing. I spend easily twice as much time editing work as I spend initially composing it. For students, I think it's very important to consider the assignment. Read all directions and supplements multiple times. What are you being asked? If it's an exam question, make sure you answer all parts of the question. My brother also teaches, and he always says, I'll say very clearly, compare and contrast these 2 theories. And some students compare, and some students contrast, and some students actually do both. Well, obviously, if you've only answered part of the question, you're not going to get a very good score. Consider your course material and content when you're completing the assignment. We expect you to use the course text as a jumping off place, even if we're asking you to conduct original research. Making links between theories and skills presented in class with correct and complete citations is a good thing. In fact, I like to see you making connections between this class and other classes. It tells me that you're seeing our program as a complete whole. Remember, your assignment is a chance for you to demonstrate what you have learned. What's been covered in class that's relevant to your assignment? As I already mentioned, I spend at least double the amount of time I spend writing editing, and in reality, it's probably more than that. Once you've written a draft, diagram or outline what you think you've written. That'll tell you if you have any serious omissions or flaws. Don't be afraid to discard whole sections of your paper. I just put them into a separate file for later use. Even if I'm really just going to get rid of them later, that makes it somehow not as bad. So what will you need for your final project? First and foremost will be the cover page. The cover page should contain a title. Notice I have here title, colon, and identifying name. Some argue that titles with colons get better grades. Perhaps, I'm not really sure. Make sure you include your full name, your institutional affiliation, which should be Cal Poly Pomona, or if you prefer, California Polytechnic University Pomona. Also, the date submitted. Next comes the abstract. The abstract should be the last thing you write. The abstract is approximately 150 to 300 words and is a summary of your paper. Be sure to include a clear statement of your central thesis or topic, the hypotheses you tested, one or two sentences on methodology, noting the sample size, that sort of thing, the results of the tests, and key conclusions. And as I said, make sure to write this last. The biggest mistake I see in abstracts is students telling me what they're going to do. At this point, you should have already done it. The introduction should present the problem under consideration. You want to have some sort of general statement of the research question or problem, but not your explicit hypotheses yet. So here's a few examples. What's the relationship between education and the social class of one's family of origin? Or, from my doctoral dissertation, what happens when men and women play sports together and a range of abilities is displayed across both genders? What's the reaction to women whose athletic performances challenge gendered conceptions of bodies? You also want to set up why this something is an important topic of consideration. Here, rather than being vague, you want to give explicit reasons. For example, if you're talking about social media site usage, it's pretty easy to go on the World Wide Web and find some somewhat reliable usage numbers. Having cited factual information is always more compelling than general statements about how important something is. Great opening lines. A great opening line can really set the stage for a project. It was a pleasure to burn. Ray Bradbury's opening to Fahrenheit 451. There was a wall. Ursula Le Guin's opening to The Dispossessed, setting the stage for an understanding of the problem of post-structuralism. The alarm clock ringing that opens up Richard Wright's Native Son. His commentary on race relations in America. If music be the food of love, play on. Very famous opening line from Shakespeare's Twelfth Night. And of course, Snoopy always gave us, it was a dark and stormy night. I'm not trying to put too much pressure on you to have a brilliant opening line, but if you can come up with something good, it's always a great way to grab the reader's attention. If you don't have the perfect opening line, I'm going to give you two strategies for opening the paper. And these will work for any academic research paper. There's two strategies that are commonly used by academics to grab a reader's attention. One is to present compelling facts that highlight the problem addressed by the paper. Another is a vignette or a story that exemplifies a key theme in the analysis. I've got two examples from two different works coming up here. Most people who've read Michel Foucault's Discipline and Punish don't forget the opening. In his example, he tells a particularly gruesome tale, grabbing the reader's attention, but also making a point about how views towards punishment have changed over time. He writes, "On the 2nd of March, 1757, Desmines the regicide was condemned to make the amende honorable before the main door of the Church of Paris, where he was said to be taken and conveyed in a cart, wearing nothing but a shirt, holding a torch of burning wax weighing 2 pounds, then in the said cart to the Place de Grève, where on a scaffold that will be erected there, the flesh will be torn from his breasts, arms, thighs, calves with red-hot pincers. His right hand, holding the knife with which he committed the said parasite, burnt with sulfur, and on those places where the flesh will be torn away, poured molten lead, boiling oil, burning resin, wax and sulfur melted together, and then his body drawn and quartered by 4 horses, and his limbs and body consumed by fire, reduced to ash, and his ashes thrown to the winds." Foucault's gruesome story isn't there just to get your attention with a little gore, but to really demonstrate how at one point in time the suffering of the body saved the soul, whereas today the suffering of the soul impacts the body. Here's another example of a little vignette from a paper I published. Guy is playing second base. He's one of the less experienced players on the field and has never played this position before. After fielding a ground ball, he lets go a weak and awkward throw that just beats the runner to first base. Laughing at his throw, Steve yells out from left field, "Come on, Guy, throw like a man." Upon hearing this, teammate Kathy replies, "He is throwing like a man. I guess he needs to throw like a woman." To me, this vignette really exemplified what the paper was about. This particular paper was what strategies were adopted to maintain everyday sexism in light of physical demonstrations to the contrary. Maybe you don't have a story. They're much easier to come by in qualitative methods. Another option is to use lots and lots of data to demonstrate why what you're doing is important, or at least interesting. That's the strategy Dr. Namiro and I used in a paper that we published based on some research we did here on campus. In 2005, Caltech's entire chemical engineering class was female, all 6 of them. In the wake of Harvard President Lord Summers' assertion that men are innately more proficient in math and science than women, questioning what these women will find when they enter the job market is imperative. Will these women enter the ranks of academia, and if so, will they be successful in the retention, tenure, and promotion process? Though women are closing the gender gap at the lower levels of education, they are not moving into positions of authority in equal numbers. According to the National Science Foundation, women earn 58% of undergraduate degrees in life sciences, biology, chemistry, geology, 47% of math degrees, and 40% of degrees in physical sciences. Still, only 19% of undergraduate degrees in engineering are earned by women. For doctoral degrees, women earn over half of those awarded overall. In 2003, in all STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math disciplines, women earned 37.5% of doctoral degrees, but only 17% of engineering and 26.5% of mathematics doctorates go to women. Women are similarly excluded from the physical sciences. 26.9% of doctoral degrees went to women, and only about a third of doctoral degrees awarded in earth, atmospheric, and ocean sciences and agricultural science go to women. By contrast, women receive the majority of doctoral degrees in psychology, 68.1%, sociology, 59.0%, anthropology, 61.0%, and area and ethnic studies, 68.9%. A key piece of this problem is the dearth of female faculty to serve as mentors and role models in these fields. Understanding the experiences of female faculty in STEM disciplines can shed light on the shortage of women in these fields and the challenges they encounter. Through a series of focus groups with women at different stages of their careers and shares in the STEM disciplines, we explored perceived barriers to advancement for women and what factors individuals saw as integral to their own success. So I've used all of this data to demonstrate why our study has relevance or is timely and important. Next is the literature review. The literature review is not you talking about one article after another. The literature review is taking the information you found in the literature and giving the reader the background information they need necessary to understand the hypotheses you are going to test. It also demonstrates your proficiency in the field. Remember, in preparing your literature review, you don't go from article to article. You work from idea to idea, setting up your hypotheses. You also want to divide your discussion into sections. Each section should have a clear heading. Subheadings may be used if necessary. Stay away from providing lots and lots of mundane details from articles. For example, if somebody else has done a study, you don't need to give all the details of how they did their study. What you're trying to do is convey how their findings are relevant to what you're going to be doing. What their sample size was, what their methods were, they're not relevant to your paper. If you're in doubt as to what a literature review should look like, take a look at any academic paper in the journal of your choice. End your literature review with your null hypotheses and the hypotheses. Right? H sub 1, hypothesis 1, then null hypothesis 1. Hypothesis 2, and then null hypothesis number 2. Now you're getting into the big points section of the paper. This is a methods class. The majority of the points you're going to earn in this class are going to come in the methods and analysis section of this paper. So I'm going to go through in detail all of the different components I expect in your methods section, but be sure to check out the study guide I posted online. First and foremost, why is a survey the best way to answer your question? Here, you want to note the strength of survey research. Be sure to cite the course texts. You'll also want to discuss what sampling method was used. Why was this method used? What are the advantages and disadvantages of this method? How did we go about collecting our sample? Make sure you have a clear discussion of the issue of generalizability. To whom can our study apply? Why or why not? Make sure you specify relative to our study. And again, don't forget to cite the course texts. Operationalization. How were your concepts operationalized? How did you take your idea and turn it into a variable? How did you make it measurable? You did this with questions on the survey. Somewhere in your paper should be the full text, including the answer categories of the questions you use to represent your independent and dependent variables. You can either have them in the text of the paper or in the appendix. If you've created any indices or scales, make sure you have all of the questions that went into those indices and scales listed in the appendix. You'll also want to note your method of combination. Tell me how you made your index or scale. Now, if you didn't have an index or scale, don't worry. Then you just need the survey questions. Make sure you have a clear statement of Which measures of association and/or tests of significance were performed? How did you know these were the appropriate tests? Hopefully your answer has something to do with the level of measurement of the variables. And be sure to note, if the variable was in one form originally and then you recoded it, you changed its level of measurement, make sure you tell me that explicitly. And again, don't forget to cite the course text. Reliability. I know that we didn't have time to do any of the reliability tests, but you could tell me what you could have done or where you think there might have been more testing needed. First of all, for reliability, there's stability versus equivalence. If you don't have any indices or scales, equivalence isn't relevant. If you do, you could talk about equivalence reliability. You could mention how you could in the future, were you to take this project on with more time, learn how to do something like Cronbach's alpha. For stability, is there something that might have been an issue? Do you think there could be a question order issue or something like that? What would you have done to test for stability reliability had we had more time? And don't forget to cite the course text. Just as for reliability, for validity, we didn't have time to establish different types of validity, but we had face validity. Define it, cite the course text, and explain how we established that. Did we have any other types of validity? Are there things we could have done to establish them had we had more time? What would you do in the future to establish validity? And be sure to cite the course text. Ethics. As you probably recall from earlier in the course, there are 4 key areas in the treatment of human subjects: harm, deception, privacy invasion, and informed consent. How did we handle these things with our project? Be explicit, and if the opportunity arises, don't forget to cite the course text. It's important that every method section note the limitations of our project. If you, ahead of time, head critics off by telling people what could have been improved about your project, or what your project can't do because it's not that kind of study, then they can't level that criticism at you. Why were you hampered with the limitations that you faced? If one were to replicate the study, what would you recommend they do differently? This is an opportunity for you to show you really understand methods. And now the data and analysis section. So, what happened when you tested each hypothesis? Clearly identify each test of significance and the results of the corresponding measures of association. Summary tables are a really great way to sum things up if you have more than one hypothesis. Tables, charts, and graphs, like you've been creating in lab, are a great way to summarize information. Don't just throw charts in to throw them in, but it's often a great way to let the reader know what's going on. A nice summary table that shows for each hypothesis what test of significance did you use and what were the results or your p-value, and then what measure of association did you use and what were the results for that. This is something I could look at very quickly and see how your project turned out. Also, you'll notice that you'll actually make this table as part of workshop number 4. But you're not out of the woods yet. Don't stop here. One of the big mistakes students make is they just stop. But you've got to tell me, the reader, what your results mean in light of the literature. Did you find a relationship? How strong was it? How would the literature explain what you found? Or do you differ? And do you have an explanation for why what you found differs from the literature? Are there any practical or theoretical implications of your findings? It's very important that in this part you cite the literature. Daryl Huff's book, How to Lie with Statistics, points out that by presenting things in a particular way, you can often make it appear as if what you want to be true is true. However, that's not good social science. Good social science tries to represent things in the most accurate manner. If you give me enough time, I can recode and manipulate data to get things to come out how I want them to be. But that isn't going to change how things really are in the world. What it's important to do is to try to figure out what is the most accurate way to represent the data. Don't forget, at the end, to tell us why your findings are important. As I mentioned already, refer back to the literature. For example, as suggested by, I found that contrary to so-and-so's findings, it's very important that you situate your findings within the range of knowledge in your field. Remember, when you're putting together your final paper, stick to the question at hand. You're going to find lots of other interesting things in the literature, in the data, but you can't write about everything. You want to focus in on the coherent story that your paper is trying to tell. When you're looking at your research findings, make sure you take the time to elaborate. What I mean by this is, let's say you find a relationship. Do you think it might be different by gender? You could add a layer and check. Are there multiple variables on the survey that could look at the same problem in different ways? Do you want to try testing them in all those different ways to confirm your results? Are there any features of the data you could use to assist in your interpretation? Taking a little time to really think about the data that you have, about your findings, will give you a more nuanced paper. Of course, you should have a conclusion. The conclusion should highlight your key findings, generalize your results, to whom can they apply, highlight any theoretical or practical implications, and if you don't know how to end your paper, a really easy way to end it is to note what future research questions are raised by your project. With our topic, that should be easy. Endnotes or footnotes are not required and are becoming less common, at least in my discipline of sociology. It's something that's an important piece of information but is tangential to the current discussion. So you're placing it at the end or at the bottom of the page. They're not required, but if you feel that they're necessary, you can go ahead and use them. Make sure to include a references page. The reference section should include all cited works, and the textbook should definitely be on the list, both of them. Make sure you use an approved format, such as ASA, APA, MLA. I don't care which one you use. Websites like Noodle Tools help you put things into proper formats, even web pages. The appendices might also contain important pieces of information that are tangential to the central discussion. Graphs, charts, pieces of data that would help someone who really wanted to take a closer look understand things, but would distract from the flow of your main argument. Some things you might put in your appendix are the survey questions you used for the project. You don't need to put the whole survey in there. I've already seen that. If you made an index or a scale, what questions were combined and what method of combination did you use? And any additional data not presented in the text that you think is relevant. For example, large charts or graphs. Always keep in mind, for any research you produce, that the causes and consequences of reports are not immediately clear. Once you give your results, they may be used in a myriad of ways, some of which you may not agree with. You can't control what others do with your work, so sometimes you may have to make the very difficult choice of not publishing something. During week 9, we as a class are going to produce one of these slideshows. Each person in the class will prepare a PowerPoint slide or two that will contain your hypotheses, or a selection if they won't all fit, a brief statement of results, a picture of you, and you will then write 3 to 5 sentences that you will read to be part of the audio. A handout going over this process will be made available to you through the course website.